Now, of course, nobody could have a greater interest in the movement of the yen, and my next guest, his employer in Japanese bank Mizuho, reports earnings in yen, but he heads a division based here in London that invests in all currencies across the globe. Welcome to The Last Word, Paul Hearn. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's almost too early to assess the impact of what's happened in Japan, but in terms of the brokerages and the financial institutions, what situation are they in at the moment? How much has this disrupted the way they're doing business?
Well, the first comment to make, obviously, is that there's a huge human dynamic to this, not only in Tokyo, but obviously even more so up in the northeast. And I think it's incredible, frankly, whether it's the banks or whether it's the people in general, how people have continued along their business. And, you know, I genuinely mean it when I say it's been pretty much business as usual. Sure, people are having a tough time. Sure, there are some power outages. Sure, some people are going home early as a result of that. But in terms of our interaction with Tokyo and in terms of the business we're doing, there's been very, very little change in terms of activity.
I mean, that is quite amazing to think that after everything that's gone on, people are still doing business as near usual as they can. What about deal making and acquisitions? Are those kind of bigger issues being put on hold at the moment?
I think it is probably a little early to say. I think, yes, it is true that I think people are waiting and reflecting. You know, having said that, we have a couple of transactions we've been working on out of Japan, which we continue to work on. We've certainly seen, interestingly, in Europe, huge interest in matters Japanese. So if you take the Japanese equity market, for example, obviously after the initial very heavy sell-off, certainly on Friday, it's been pretty quiet today because of Tokyo being shut itself on Monday. But Friday, we probably saw bigger volumes buying Japanese equities than we've seen in a very long time.
And obviously there is interest in those equities that are going to benefit from the reconstruction. I'm thinking of the prefabricated homes manufacturer or importer that seems to have gone up something like 200%. But there must be a general interest in construction shares?
Certainly that people are trying to pick their sectors, and construction is obviously one of them. But I think generally people view the sell-off as overdone. I think there's an increasing view that as 24-hour news moves over more to matters such as Libya, that perhaps, and I hope I'm right, and obviously we still await what happens in terms of the nuclear situation, but that maybe there's been a degree, without underplaying this, there's been a degree of overplay, and that the sell-off in the market is probably unjustified.
And the international security firms, have you seen them cutting their presence in Tokyo? I mean, there's obviously was the initial concern where expats were leaving, but overall there hasn't been much change, has there? I
think there's been very little movement out of Tokyo, and in fact I've talked to a number of banks today who perhaps had nationalities where perhaps people thought they might have moved out, and there's been very little movement out. And looking forward, I wouldn't expect there to be either. You know, I think there's huge opportunity within Japan, terrible circumstances causing it, but there'll be a hell of a lot of financing, etc. to do. And then over time, I don't think it's going to change, and it might even increase the interest in the Japanese in broadening their whole Pan-Asian business situation.
Indeed. Now, I have to ask you about the intervention that we saw on Friday, and what effect you think that's going to have longer term, because of course the key question is it enough, and do they need to keep going back in?
Right. And I wish I knew the answer to the question.
I know, that's a difficult one.
As you know, it's about 10 years since we last saw intervention of this kind. I think they've been relatively clever in that they haven't sort of targeted anything specifically. They've pushed it back into the range where it's been trading over several months. I guess a lot will depend on the news that comes out over the next few days. But again, to the extent that the nuclear situation can be stabilized and we don't have fears of very long overall shortages of power, then I don't think necessarily that we're going to see huge additional pressure on the yen.
Okay. Paul Hearn, thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you very much.